Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and this is Brooklyn Savvy. Hi, I'm Tony Williams, and welcome to Brooklyn Savvy. I am Brooklyn and beyond. I am very excited about this episode because to me, this really defines what Brooklyn Savvy is all about. It's about unpacking injustices and dismantling systemic racism. Now, I know there will be those of you who that word, racism, but guess what? It's not. It's something that we're working on. It's something that if we can unpack this, that we're going to change the world for everybody. So it's good that we say racism and unpack in the same sentence. So with that, let me first introduce the Racial Justice Commissioners. We have Laree Daniel Favors. Now you're also the Executive Director of the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College.
Yes, ma'am.
We have Jennifer Jones Austin, who is the chairperson and leading voice on social justice issues. And she's also the president and CEO of the Federation of Protestant Welfare Agencies, better known as FPWA. And we have Yesenia Mata, and you are the Executive Director of La Comina. Right? La Comina?
Correct.
I said that right. Thank you so much. I'm just really excited to talk to all of you ladies because Jennifer and I talk all the time, and one of the things we've talked about is this ballot initiative. But before we dig into ballot initiative, I really wanted our viewers to understand the importance of the work that you're doing. So Jennifer, as the chairperson, kick us off into why this work is so important.
So, first, let me just thank you for doing this because it's critically important that all of your viewers and beyond know about these racial justice ballot measures. This work began in earnest back in 2021 in the wake of the tragic killings of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor. The nation woke up. Was in the midst of COVID, and the nation was seeing the disproportionate impact of COVID on communities of color. And then we witnessed the killing of George Floyd for all the world to see. And then we learned about what happened with Breonna Taylor and with Ahmaud Arbery. And so the nation was alert to what was happening, and people were, fidgety and wondering, what can we do about this? One of the things that we appreciated was that we could not go back to business as usual when COVID was over and when the unrest died down in the wake of the killings. So the then mayor of New York City, Bill de Blasio, said, let's center on racial justice from the vantage point of structural racism.
Which was so keen on his part, very keen.
You mentioned the work that my fellow commissioners do and that I do concerning social justice in communities that have long been challenged. For so long, we as a nation have been centering on programs or policies, as though these programs or policies in and of themselves are going to change attitudes, values, and beliefs, and foundational, systems and structures. What the Racial Justice Commission appreciated was that you really cannot Band-Aid, policy Band-Aid, or program Band-Aid your way out of injustice that is rooted in this society, in the foundational laws and structures. So the Racial Justice Commission was created to do just that, to begin to look at New York City's foundational laws, the Charter of New York City, which is essentially our Constitution, and to begin to think about how we could change this Constitution to seed racial justice and racial equity in government functioning.
Now, you did a number of meetings. What was the community input? What happened there? Laree, why don't you take that from me, if you wouldn't mind?
Between the meetings that we had, the listening sessions, hearing testimony from New Yorkers who came out in every single borough, thousands of content that was provided for us, where we basically got to hear people talk about not just an incident, but patterns of behavior, systemic demonstrated histories that they were living. And we didn't just, it wasn't an issue simply between white New Yorkers and black New Yorkers. We were listening to people across socioeconomic status, Latino voices, Asian voices. And we were able to really get a sense that what New Yorkers were asking for was something that they knew was not going to solve racism, but that would be able to put the city on a pathway towards going down and a goal towards equity, and a goal that would provide equitable access to power and resources. And when you heard about the disparate experiences that people were having, we realized, if you look at the charter, hundreds of pages, thousands of chapters and verses and content that you would have to grapple with, and we could not in any real way go through each of those elements and ask, how does structural racism show up here? So we chose instead to focus on creating these three initiatives that would allow the city to continue grappling with the questions that were raised in 2020. So this is not a Band-Aid. This is a path forward that if the new voters in the city of New York agree, and if it is voted into law, that this is a path that would cause the city to really have to engage long-term with some of the histories that brought us to this point.
Now, my question is, you talk about all New Yorkers. Are all New Yorkers interested in diversity, equity, and inclusion? You're from Staten Island, and I'm not calling out Staten Island. But, they're known to be somewhat right-wing, somewhat conservative borough. How is it being responded to there? Because those are some of the minds that need to be shifted, I would think. I think that's where the battle is going to be fought. So how's that going?
Well, the beauty of this commission is that we wanted to make sure that every New Yorker was heard. And the first meeting that we held, public meeting, we held it in Staten Island.
All right. So we're calling out Staten Island.
And that was beautiful because the community of Staten Island felt heard. For so long, we've always felt like, oh, Staten Island is excluded, or they call us Jersey, or various other names. But the beauty of this commission is that we emphasize the importance of creating inclusion. And when we held that first meeting, we held it in the Stapleton area. The Stapleton area is one of the communities that was greatly affected during the pandemic. Many Black and Brown communities were affected. We had many people that passed away because of COVID, and that was very symbolic for us, that it was held in the Stapleton area, and the attendance in that meeting was huge. And every person that spoke was saying, thank you, Commission, for coming to Staten Island, ensuring that we were heard. And I think that sent a message, the message of inclusion, the message of ensuring that every person in every borough was included, regardless of race, religion, even status. I know that there were people that were there that were undocumented and felt heard, that said, thank you for including me here. So it was very well attended, but overall, there's a community there. And for so long, we were excluded because many thought that, only certain people think this way in Staten Island, but we're there, and we just needed to be heard. We needed somebody to come and give us that opportunity to amplify our voices. So I really am very excited of the work that the commission is doing.
Let me just jump in here real quickly on that point, Lisa, if you don't mind. Yesenia is spot on, but we also appreciate that not everybody wants equity.
Right. I'm glad that was where I was headed.
You all know that I suffered a near-death experience many years ago. And one of my good friends once said to me, she said, I don't know if I should pray for you to live or just, whatever God wants to happen. And I said to my husband, my friend said, she didn't know if she should pray for me that I heal. And he said, not everybody wants you to succeed. Not everybody wants you to live.
Wow.
So there are a lot of people out here who will say that they'd want equity. They want to see everybody do well in this nation, in this society. But behind closed doors,
It's a different
what's going to happen to me?
How will you vote?
If we vote for racial if racial equity becomes a part of law, how does that affect my bottom line? Am I now going to have to be more considerate of people when it comes to earnings? Am I going to have to be more considerate when it comes to diversity? All of that. And what we're trying to help people appreciate is that equity is good for everybody.
Make that argument. How is equity good for everyone?
So let's just simply begin with, if we have equitable systems and structures, then we don't have to do cleanup work at every turn, right? We are expending as a society so much money in remedial educational program. We're spending so much money in health, in health treatment for things that can be prevented. But it's because we've created these systems and structures that say certain people cannot have equitable access to quality education, equitable access to quality health care. If we center on equity and everybody having fair quality, basic needs met, then we're not going to be doing the cleanup work on the other side.
And let's look at what happened with the airline pilots, how most of them are white males and we can't get flights. Meaning, so if we had had a pipeline and an openness to bringing everyone along, we would have better outcomes. Lisa, you wanted to mention something.
Yeah, well, a couple of things came to mind as I was listening to you. One, doing these listening sessions, I think is always a good thing. But how does the information come back to the people who participated? Because, one of the dangers is, oh yeah, here we come again. I tell you what I think, and then nothing happens, right? And so making that connection, and a lot of times things are happening, but the direct connection is not made for people. Mm-hmm. So that's one thought. And then the other that I'd love to hear more about is, and I understand this is it's a strategic move, right? I get that. But then who's accountable for executing, and what does executing look like, and how does this charter then set folks up, and who is set up? Is it just for government? Is it just for business to then act in different ways?
Well, so this gets right into the value statement that the ballot initiative is talking about, and perhaps we'll have you all talk a little bit about that, even though we're also going to be talking about it again in part 2. We'll talk about it now as well.
So I think it's the value statement, yes, which is one of the ballot initiatives that asks, or it basically tells the history of what happened in this land, the land that we occupy, identifying that it belonged to the indigenous, tracking what happened to enslaved Africans here. And then it sets a value statement that is a guiding statement for how New York City's laws and the charter are going to be interpreted, which really helps us to have some parameters. And so if there are questions that have to be decided, the idea is that this guiding statement would lead you towards the answer that is going to bring us closer to equity. In one of the second ballot initiatives, which I know you're going to talk about much more extensively in part 2, the Racial Justice Commission and plan that every city, single agency in this city is going to have to be able to supply. A plan that looks forward and one that looks back, identifying
I'm shocked that we don't have that. This is when business is way ahead of government.
And the beauty of this is, as I was saying at the outset, setting the city on a path forward so that we're not dealing with the Band-Aid of today, but really creating guardrails that require every agency to look back at how there has been disparate treatment in the execution of services in the past, and then creating a plan to ameliorate that brings them forward. And it's not just the one plan. Every other year, they are going to have to produce this, so they are required. Every agency, think about that, sanitation, education, and think about all of the many agencies that our people, particularly those who are economically and racially marginalized, how often they are engaging with agencies that leave them in a position that maintains structural inequality. Well, when those agencies have to then be accountable for what they have done in the past, and when you have to have the data that's going to then guide how they move forward, that is what we mean when we talk about a path forward. And that's what's going to be on the ballot. Racial justice, which people fought for in 2020, is literally on the ballot in ways the city has never seen.
I stay away from the, your ancestors, they walked miles for you to have the right to vote, because what I once heard a young person say is, they moved for me to have the right, but it didn't mean that I had to vote. The response to voter apathy is showing how government can actually work and how we hold people accountable. That's it in a nutshell. I mean, young people increasingly don't go to church because they don't see the church showing up for them. That's what it all, once you see somebody riding for you, you're gonna ride with them. So the fact is, those of us who do vote, young or old, should get out and vote, and then show them what voting can actually make happen. But the bottom line is that it's the accountability on the other side that is mutual. Nothing happens without us all feeling that we have a role and responsibility. Our work doesn't, the part of the problem that we have is we think our work stops once we vote. Doesn't.
you and I were on a panel together that I was moderating about 3 years ago. And there was this student that stands up very proudly and says, I don't want to vote. Why should I vote? How do we, voting is critically important.
Absolutely,
in this.
absolutely.
Otherwise, this just dies. So how do we turn minds toward the fact that voting changes things? And if you don't vote, you're basically a part of the system.
One of the things I always like to start with is remembering that we've only gotten the right to vote in this country without facing death in 1965. That's less than 60 years of access to just registering to vote. From 1619 until that point, we've got over 340 years of proactive exclusion of Black people from being able to participate meaningfully. Not just registering to vote, how do you find good candidates? How do you get an issue on the ballot? How do you fundraise? How do you move money from one pot to another? We don't have that access. So one of the things we're doing at the Center for Law and Social Justice at Medgar Evers College, for example, an 11-week course that we provide to the community that breaks down the ballot, that teaches how you take an issue and organize around it. Oh, that would be great.
That sounds like a Brooklyn Savvy show.
But when it comes to young people in particular who feel like they don't need to vote, number one, you have to hire young people to talk to young people. And you also have to take what they care about first and then tie that to the electoral system. So I never go into a room of young people and say, your ancestors died for the right to vote, because they don't care. We haven't done a good job of teaching ancestral veneration, so they don't care. But if I ask them, what is the one thing about your community that frustrates you the most, that if you had the power you could change, and they tell me, and I can take that issue and tie it to who's voting. Oh, you don't like how you're policed? Did you know the person who picks the police officer is someone you can vote on? And we have to remind them, we don't have kings and queens in this country, but basically your vote answers who gets to sit in the king or queen position, who gets to answer the substantive policy issues for your people. And that's, they don't get to pick a king and queen everywhere
And I
else.
would say substantive policy issues.
Yes.
That probably needs a little bit of a breakdown too, right? When you talk to them, right?
So if you
Talk to people,
if you are
students.
concerned about seeing homelessness, that's a policy issue.
Right.
Who gets access to housing is a policy issue. If you are wondering why the hospitals in your community are closing, that's a policy decision. Who gets access to the schools that have books that were written in this century versus being written in the 19s, as my daughter calls them? That's a policy question. When we were during the height of the pandemic, giving out equipment, and we were getting calls from people. I got a laptop from the school, but there's no E, there's no period, and no space bar. How am I supposed to type a sentence? Who gets access to high digital quality material and who doesn't? That's a policy decision. But when you can explain that to people who for the first 340 years of this country's existence were excluded from that engagement and understanding, the light bulb goes on. Then they'll vote. And then they'll do more than vote. They will organize and ask how I can create solutions and employ the resources around me, so that voting is just step 4 or 5 in a 10-step process between issue identification and solution that I don't just implement, but I then can fight and maintain.
I almost want to clap after that.
That was amazing. And as I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, isn't this an educational problem? The education system, teaching civics, teaching.
Well, see, here's where I differ. Yes, it is an educational problem, but I tend to
just
believe
understanding how government works.
But let's just begin with, if you appreciate the need for this Racial Justice Commission and its work and the proposals, then you appreciate that racism is structural in nature and it's intentional. I also believe that the lack of civics engagement
is intentional
in schools, in public schools,
it's part of the
is intentional.
That's right.
There's intentionality behind it. If every child is educated on the importance of being civically engaged and how you were able to bring forth your voice,
we wouldn't need to be having these conversations.
we wouldn't be in this situation.
That's right.
Right? So what I think we all can appreciate when we dig deep and look at the foundations of this society and why this work that we're all doing here and talking about is so critically important, we can appreciate none of this is just happenstance.
Well, I understand that.
None of this, right. And so I'm saying,
But our viewers may not.
Right. But and that's, what we're doing, and we talked about this over the course of the time that we spent together engaging with individuals and communities throughout New York City and then fashioning these proposals. This is critical race theory in action.
I wanted to even talk about that. Critical race theory, is that a thing? And by that I mean, folks don't seem to understand what it is. Explain that.
Isn't
Explain
it illegal? Isn't it a legal issue?
Well, it is a
It's
theory that
legal
was
theory,
created
yeah.
by professors,
Yes.
Right.
some of whom are legal professors, one of them being Candace Crenshaw,
Yes.
who for many years, I think, is that Kimberly?
Kimberly
I have a
Crenshaw.
good friend named Candace Crenshaw, whose cousin is Kimberly Crenshaw. That's where that came from. Candace Crenshaw. She's one of the founders of critical race theory, and as you may know, I republished a book that my father wrote even before that, titled "God in the Ghetto," in 1979, in which he deconstructs the system of racism, capitalism, and militarism, all working to continually oppress people of color, and how this system is structured to do just that. So, what critical race theory is saying is that if you look at the laws and the happenings in the society, you can trace it back to structural foundations. The GI Bill, redlining, beginning with the 3/5 clause in the United States Constitution. All of these laws.
Clause that said that black people were 3/5 a person.
Right.
Yeah.
All of it designed to intentionally and continually keep black persons at a disadvantage.
And that's why it's important to know your history.
Right. And if you bring it forward today, we still have it in place. When we have, on the books, systems and structures that allow for black women to continually earn less than white women. When we have systems and structures like the federal poverty level, which allows in this nation for it to be, considered that a family of four, that, gross income, $27,750 anywhere in America is technically not poor. And we know that black women and women of Hispanic origin earn 64 cents and 56 on the dollar, respectively, with respect to what a white man earns. We then understand why black children and children of Hispanic origin are growing up in poverty at disproportionately greater rates than white children. It's systematic, it's structural.
And it's kind of intentional. It's somewhat
and
intentional.
that's critical
That's
race
the hard
theory. And
part
what
about
critical
it.
race
There's
theory is
intention
doing,
behind it, yeah.
what critical race theory does is it helps you to appreciate how these laws are set up and structured in such a way to perpetuate these injustices. And that's why the Racial Justice Commission's work is so important, because what we're doing is we're going in and looking at these structures and saying no more. No more.
Right.
Yeah.
I wanted one. This is going to take us perhaps in an interesting direction, but the issue of reparations, right? Meaning, was it Evanston, Illinois, where they did something related to reparations? Is this opening the door to that, or is it what is reparations, or does it?
Where does the reparations fit in this?
How does it align?
So reparations speaks to the repairing of the specific injury that was enacted upon African descendant people. This commission is seeking to provide equitable access to power and resources for all New Yorkers. So this does not speak to the specific injury that people of African descent incurred. I would love for such a commission to be set up. However, specifically speaking to that issue, this is about ensuring that racial equity is at the center of governance in this city, and that the city is going to be placed in, assuming these are voted into existence. These are going to be ballot proposals. These are questions that New Yorkers get to answer about whether or not this is, if they are in agreement with these proposals, which is one of the reasons we're doing education about it, so people know this is a question that is going to be presented to the city that they will get to vote on. So it doesn't speak to reparations. It doesn't speak to the enslavement of African people and the legacy of that in this city. It does, however, take racial justice and put it in a governing framework that would allow for the amelioration, perhaps of some of the harms that were caused by that, but it does not speak to the issue of reparations specifically.
But I'd like to go back to, Tony asked a question earlier about, the listening tours in Staten Island, and actually the question is everyone, we acknowledge that everyone is not in favor of equity for many different reasons, and critical race theory certainly falls into that. I mean, the schools or parents are up in arms. There's a whole, cadre of people who are against critical race theory. I would argue because they don't understand what it is, and for lots of other reasons.
I'm going to argue that it's because they do understand.
Absolutely.
They understand.
Well, I think it's both. I think it's both.
Let me say it to you this way.
But let me ask the question.
Yeah, because that's a whole lot.
Yeah. Well, I think it's both. I think it's both. I think it's both. How in the education? So this is on the ballot for the November election,
Yes,
correct?
50 days out.
50 days out. how are we ensuring that this will pass, that we will get the vote?
Well, this is the beginning right here. This
Right, and let me just say,
conversation.
we are here to tell people about these ballot measures. We're not here to tell people how to vote one way or the
Understood.
other.
Right.
We believe that they're value add, but we're not here to tell you how to vote. There is a public education campaign that is well underway. People hopefully are seeing these ballot measures talked about in various fora and spaces. Traditional media, other forms of media, public bus stops, subways, and the like. And we are going back into community with
And
faith
churches.
institutions,
churches are big, yeah.
community-based organizations, and helping to get the word out.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap, but we're going to go into part 2, where Brooklyn and beyond, we're going to talk more about these ballot initiatives or proposals and how they're going to change things for New Yorkers. So anyway, thank you, commissioners, so much for being on Brooklyn Savvy. You women are wonderful. I'm just so excited about all of this. But anyway. Tune in for part 2, and we'll see you next time on Brooklyn Savvy.